Hi there, my dear friends. We're on our way to Bethlehem. The shepherds invited one another. They said, let's go over to Bethlehem and see whether it's true what the angels said to us. So they're on the way to Bethlehem, and we have been following this way to Bethlehem. We started right at the beginning of the Bible, and we found out that Rachel, she died on the way to Bethlehem. She didn't quite make it, and she gave birth to a child, Benjamin, who wasn't quite born in Bethlehem. And then we saw later that this Bethlehem, that was a symbol for something. I talked about the attitude of Bethlehem, or the ethos, the spirit of Bethlehem, and we contrasted that a bit later with the spirit and the attitude of Benjamin, and that they were against one another. When Rachel gave birth to Benjamin, she called him Ben-Omi, the son of my sorrows, and Jacob changed his name to Benjamin, which means the son of my right hand. Now we went up to David, and we saw that David of Bethlehem, that he was often in contrast to Saul, who came from Benjamin, and that their attitudes and that their character had been formed by the two places that they came from. And David was a Benjamin, and David was a man who loved God. David was a man who was humble and wanted to serve God, until he came to Jerusalem. And it seems like Jerusalem corrupted him a little bit. The city corrupted this guy who came from the rural village of Bethlehem, but still, there's still something there all the time. Bethlehem is something that we look back to. Now, as we develop this story, after David died, his fourth son, Solomon, became king in his place. Now, this is something that God does again and again. We always think that the firstborn is the one who gets the inheritance. But with David, it was his fourth son. With Jacob, Judah was the fourth son. David was the eighth son. So God confounds the wisdom of the world to do what he thinks is right. Now, Solomon, he started off as being quite a good king. He was a very wise man, and he had a lot of riches, and he started to build stuff. He built the temple, which of course was what God allowed him to do, and the presence of God came into that place, and the glory of God came into that place. And God, at that time, God really did live in Jerusalem. He was at the center of the city. He was at the center of the nation. But as Solomon developed, as he became older, he started to be tainted by the spirit of the city, by the spirit of Jerusalem, the earthly Jerusalem, and a number of things happened. He took a wife from the king of Egypt, and she probably had an influence upon him. He was also building palaces and building this and that and all kinds of things. He was exploiting the people. He was taking heavy taxes. He was working them very, very hard, and he was just losing this simplistic spirit of Bethlehem, this inclusive spirit of Bethlehem, this attitude that allowed everybody to be part. And there was a big gap between him and the people. He was building, and then he began to take other wives. And in the end, he had 400 wives. Well, of course, we saw that bringing wives from other places isn't necessarily bad, but they were bringing their influence, they were bringing their gods, they were bringing their culture, they were bringing their attitude into Israel, which was anti-godly. And so at the end of Solomon's reign, we're in a very sorry state. His son Rehoboam becomes king, and Rehoboam, he wants to continue to do what his father Solomon did with spending and taxation and building, and that in the end the nation splits into two. It splits into the 10 northern tribes of Israel and the 2 southern tribes. The northern northern tribes called themselves Israel, and the southern tribes were called Judah. And the capital of Judah was then Jerusalem. The capital of Israel was Samaria. And they developed their own way. Israel went completely away from God. God continued to send prophets. He sent Elijah. He sent Elisha. He sent Hosea. He sent Amos and others who warned the people, who begged them to come back to the Lord. Otherwise, it would have dire consequences. But they didn't hear. He also sent prophets to Judah, and the decline in Judah was not quite as fast as in Israel. But he sent to them the prophet Isaiah. He sent Jeremiah. He sent a number of the minor prophets. And we're going to have a look at one in a minute. And the message was, if you don't repent, if you don't turn back to God, it will have dire consequences. Israel didn't listen to God at all. And then the Assyrians came. They destroyed the nation. They took the people away captive, and they disappeared from the historical record. We don't actually know what happened to them. They were taken. And the influence of Israel tainted also Judah. And Judah, although the decline wasn't as swift, it was a decline. The Assyrians wanted to come and to take Judah, take Jerusalem, but through the influence of the godly king Hezekiah, they were stopped. But they did come back later, not the Assyrians, but the Babylonians. And a prophet called Micah, he warned them that this would happen. He started to minister just before Israel fell, and he prophesied that destruction and judgment was coming to Israel. And if Judah didn't repent, the same thing would happen. And they didn't repent, and they were going from bad to worse. And Micah kept on warning them that this would have dire consequences. And it was like they didn't listen, and the godly people in Judah, they must have been getting very depressed because their people were not turning away from the wicked ways. They were not going back to God, and this was going to have dire consequences. But then there's in the message of Micah, there is a change comes. It's hinged, and it turns in a completely different way. Now, I don't know whether you ever saw the film Crocodile Dundee. It's an old film now. It was made in the 1980s. But I remember watching it, and there's one film where Crocodile Dundee is an Australian. He's in the very north of Australia, in on the edge of the desert, and there's some rough guys in a pub together, and they're drinking, and there's one very big, strong guy called Donk, and he puts a glass of beer on his head, and he has a bet with the people that nobody can knock the beer off his head by boxing him in or hitting him. And so they give him money, one after the other has a try. And the one who does it gets all the money back. But one after another, they hit him, they thump him in the stomach. But this Donk is like a big rock. He doesn't move at all. And then Crocodile Dundee, the hero of the story, he comes and he kisses Donk on the face, and the Donk on the face, and Donk is so surprised and so embarrassed by this that he takes a step back, and the beer falls off his head, and that Crocodile Dundee has won. And this is what God does in effect, because we're expecting destruction, we're expecting judgment, we're expecting the end of the world, and God comes in and does something that we are not expecting. And in an act of love, he sends Micah, the prophet, to prophesy that from Bethlehem, and here we have it again, Bethlehem is suddenly back on the agenda of God. From Bethlehem, the ruler will come. From Bethlehem, everybody knows what he's talking about. From Bethlehem, the promised Messiah will come. A contemporary of Micah was Isaiah, and he starts to prophesy that unto you a child has been born, a son has been given, the government will be upon his shoulders, and we'll call him this and that. The very, very powerful promise that we like to read, especially at Christmas. He's showing us that God has not given up on us. And my dear friend, God has not given up on you. God has not given up on your situation. God has not given up on our country and on the situation that is taking place in this world at the moment. God has not given up. And in the midst of destruction and coming judgment, there is hope. And we just keep hold of this hope. And then we read on and we find out that Micah, the name Micah, it means who is like God. And then there's a question in the later chapters, is who is like God, who forgives the sin of his people, and he doesn't hold his transgressions against us. There is hope for us. God is not finished with us yet. God is not finished with you, my dear friend. God is not finished with your family. God is not finished with your situation. He is still working, and he will work and continue to work in the history of mankind. Well, we're nearly in Bethlehem, so I'll see you tomorrow, and I can't wait. Bye-bye. God bless you.